There was a question about what is the solution to these recurrent droughts, and I think the solution, in a word, is adaptation. One interesting aspect of the current emergency is that we see a flow of refugees out of Somalia and into Ethiopia and Kenya who are not, in the first instance, refugees from the insecurity in Somalia, but refugees from the climate change that is affecting Somalia. It's very, very clear that as global climate change continues, it will become more and more important for the countries in the Horn of Africa to develop their agricultural policies to that fact and to ensure that social safety nets protect women and children and other poor people who are especially vulnerable to the impact of drought. That is precisely what we are trying to do through the World Bank's ongoing projects in Kenya, in Ethiopia, and in the other countries that I mentioned earlier. We are investing heavily in smart agriculture. We are helping to expand modern irrigation techniques. We are doing research on drought-resilient crops. We are looking at livestock productivity that's sensitive to the environmental consequences of, for example, free grazing. And we're working to develop new water resources and to expand social safety nets for the people who are on the margins. On May 30th, President Kibaki declared a disaster in Kenya as a consequence of the drought. And as a result of that declaration, the tariff on food imports was lifted, enabling maize from outside the country to come into Kenya, and also using the international maize price to tamp down the domestic maize price. We at the World Bank believe that Kenya is in a structural deficit, we believe that Kenya is in a structural food deficit due to rising population as well as finite amount of arable land. And as a result, we believe that that suspension of the tariff on maize imports should be made permanent. You also know that in mid-July, I don't remember the exact date, the cabinet met to discuss the drought emergency, and it made a couple of important decisions. One was to allow genetically modified maize into the country for production into maize flour. And the other was to appropriate 8 billion shillings to improve finance emergency assistance to the drought-affected parts of the country. Dadaab now has almost 400,000 Somali refugees and a fairly large Kenyan host population that surrounds the camps. This makes Dadaab the third largest city in Kenya, and it's located in a part of the country that is extremely fragile from an environmental perspective. While it's encouraging to know that the international community and the government are able to provide life-saving interventions in Dadaab because they have been present in Dadaab for a long time, it's also true that there are many, many people arriving there every day from Somalia who are in very, very weak condition. The growth of the number of Somalis in the camps has been unprecedented. Today we're seeing approximately 1,300 people arriving every day, some of them in very, very desperate circumstances. It's clear that a lot more will need to be done for those communities, and particularly for the most recent arrivals, to ensure that they receive the life-saving assistance that they need. But I'm also very concerned about the Kenyans who are living in the arid lands a far distance from Dadaab. Whereas in Dadaab you find UNHCR and the World Food Programme, UNICEF, WHO, international NGOs like CARE. They simply don't have the assets to deploy under these extreme circumstances. And the longer those circumstances continue, the less they will have an ability to respond and to cope.